Okay, hello and welcome. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Sandra Dolak, and I live here in La Veta, Colorado. Huerfano County is the county that La Veta's in. I do a lot of work in Walsenburg and Gardner. There's only 3 main communities in our whole county, and they all have very, very different complexions and flavors. And I live in La Veta, so I can live at the foot of the mountains, and my heart resides in Walsenburg.
And you're originally from Pueblo, you were just saying, and you came down here and...
Yeah, as a kid, we'd go fishing on the upper Huerfano, and I just thought it was the neatest place in the whole world. And when we'd come through Walsenburg, it fascinated me. And we had lived from Eagle River, Alaska to Tucson, Arizona, and 20 years in Wyoming, and wanted to come back to southern Colorado. And it just made so much sense to come to Huerfano County.
So can you tell me a little bit about the foundation that you started?
It's called Huajatolla Heritage Foundation. Basically, I'm a grant writing fool. I love to write grants. And with the foundation, I was completely grant funded. And we took Huajatolla Heritage Foundation and started doing Huajatolla Heritage Festivals with the sole purpose of honoring the Native American and Hispanic cultures, and did projects in the park, had wonderful performers, vendors, dances, food, and did that for several years, and then kind of branched out into a number of different things to just promote the culture, to teach classes, to work on storytelling, wherever. I kind of had to follow the money. And when I find money to do something, or I see a grant that was out there, I would invent something that fit with our purpose to fit the grant, and write a grant and get some money. So that's what I did. Colorado Creative Industries has been very generous to me and to our projects. And not this last year, but the 2 years the first one was called El Arte de Nuestros Abuelos, the art of our grandparents. And then the last one last year that kind of fit right into it was Wisdom Archives of Huerfano County. And it just all kind of keeps flowing and happening. The Wisdom Archives was part of what we did with a little grant also from the Huerfano County Historical Society to do our 25 founding families of Huerfano County, and that was just hugely successful. One of the other things is I work with Warm Cookies of the Revolution out of Colorado, out of Denver. It's a Colorado organization, and they are so cool. They do the neatest things in the neatest way, and it's all about civic health. But people roll their eyes at civic health and talking about being involved in the community and political kinds of things. And Evan Weisman, that is the executive director, and Adrian Molina, who's just this amazing poet. Evan's theory is, if you serve warm cookies, how can anything go wrong? So they have all these different kinds of programs, knitting programs. They have programs where they do mock trials. They have mixtape things. Communities in Huerfano County. There is Cachara, which only has about 100 year-round residents. In the summertime, it'll swell to as many as 3,000 people over the 4th of July. A lot of second homes, a lot of visitors, but only about 100 people live there year-round. And I believe that there are no children that live in Cachara right now that come to school in La Veta. Then there's La Veta, and we have 788 people. Is the statistic, and it's a lovely, lovely town, but it's also become very much a mecca for retired people, a lot of artists. Then there's Walsenburg, and it has a little over 3,000 people, and it is really the heart of the community. It's the county seat, and a more Hispanic demographic in the population. And then there's Gardner, that is the fourth little town in the County, and it has like 300 people, more in the upper Huerfano Valley. And that was really kind of the heart. There were two hearts of where Huerfano County was settled. One was out east of Huerfano in the original Cachara, and then the other one was out in Gardner. And Gardner was kind of a crossroads for like Santa Fe Trail and Taos Trail and a Ute Trail, and right over the mountains in the San de Cristos. And it really was a hub of, I feel, the civilization in Huerfano County. Well, the four communities, there is no overlap between the four of them. And that was one of my goals, was maybe we could build some bridges. Puentes was the name of the project, Puentes, and see if we couldn't get a little more respect with the respective community, and maybe we can create a community of Huerfano County. So that's what we've been working on, and we've done several Puentes projects. Then Warm Cookies got some money to do something called Future Town that they're doing in several towns here in the area. Us, Fort Garland Center, Leadville, and Alamosa, and it's in doing some visioning of what we could become, what do we want, and it's been really fun and really interesting, and we've been able to bring people together and really bring the community together somewhat. We brought the county together, and we're seeing progress. We really are.
So when you're going back to the founding families of Huerfano, which you were just saying, meaning, because I had seen stuff posted about it or whatever, and I was like, I wonder how they establish who the founding families are, but it turns out it's just whoever has photos.
What we did is put out a call for people, and then Sylvia Lucero Brandel, who's got deep roots down here, had a wonderful collection of pictures, and we just decided our criteria for the 25 founding families would be who had pictures from 1862 to 1900s of their ancestors and how far back we could go. And I don't think we went a whole lot further back than the 1862. We did go further than our 25. We ended up with 33 that we had the photographs for.
Oh, okay.
And what we did was had 3 boards, and each of the boards was 6 foot. So had 18 foot of pictures, and we could put them on both sides. So we had 36 foot of pictures of the ancestors and identified and the families they belonged to. It was beautiful. It was really wonderful. Did it as part of our Puentes projects, tie one project into the other, part of our archives project, and had a event with Warm Cookies of the Revolution at the community center in Walsenburg, and we had about 500 people show up. It was great. We had music, we had food, and the grand unveiling of our pictorial archive.
Okay, yeah. So I've been seeing those periodic events. So those are held in different locations so that you're able to sort of build some community around that.
Try and move things around. Work real closely with Francisco Fort Museum here in La Vida, because they're the ones that do the cultural things here in La Vida. And I have disbanded Huajatolla Heritage Foundation as an independent 501c3, but now I'm working with Spanish Peaks Community Foundation, which is another 501c3, and I'm underneath their umbrella.
Oh, okay.
And that made a lot of sense for me. And they also do the Fox Theater, so they have 2 programs specifically underneath their umbrella, the Fox Theater and Huajatolla Heritage Foundation. And, I still get to be grant writer and pretty much do programming around arts and culture.
Okay. So I was telling you about I guess maybe we would qualify. My Alira's family were in, so I just went to the Steelworks Museum. And they had, all the different mining camps and the years they were founded or whatever. And I thought, I'd have to look at my photos, but I thought that they said that the Walsen camps didn't start until like 1883 or something. But I swear that my family was listed in the 1880 census as Walsenburg or East Walsenburg.
Yeah. And
But wasn't it Plaza?
Walsenburg sort of causes me heartburn. The town of Walsenburg, in the original town, that had
Plaza
the
de los
post office.
Leones, right?
Well, no, it really was Caceres that was out on Highway 10, and that was an early Hispanic settlement, very agrarian. They were sheep herders, and then Fred Walson came to town, and he decided that he needed the post office and a town named after him, and had money and influence, and the railroad that had gone through where they could load their wool and whatnot was kind of rerouted. He moved the post office and named the town Walsenburg. Before it was Walsenburg, it was Plaza de los Leones, and and I'm not going to be certain. I believe the Caceres out east predated Plaza de los Leones. I am not entirely sure of that. So, and then everything was gobbled up and became Walsenburg.
Okay, so it wasn't it wasn't named Walsenburg for the camps. It was just him. Okay.
Him.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the camps were called Walsen,
yeah. There were like 5 of them.
One of the interesting things that I have in the cookbook that I'm going to tell you about is I have a roster from the CFNI that came out of the steel mill museum that is from 1923, 1924, just in Huerfano County. The Walsen mines, which were the CFNI, Colorado Fuel and Iron Corporation mines, had 1,200, I believe it's 1,246 people that worked for them. And this roster that I have that I'm fascinated with, 1923, 1924, of the 1,296 employees in their mines, they listed them also their nationalities. There were 41 nationalities. I've always said we were a melting pot, and a friend pointed out as I was doing the cookbook, that sounded like we were fondue, so let's call us a beautiful tossed salad. So, built off the 21 founding families and part of the Wisdom Archives, we also did a project called Coal Camps and Cow Camps, how the miners, ranchers, and cowboys shaped the legacy of Huerfano County, and did the same format, did the same pictorial archives, lots of pictures of the mines, lots of pictures of the early ranches. We have 17 centennial ranches in Huerfano County, which is a designation by History Colorado that they have to be in the same family and operating for more than 100 years.
Wow.
So the ranching, all the roots are very, very deep here.
So, okay, so if the camps didn't come in until like 1883 or whenever, and my family was already here, so presumably they were sheep herders.
Probably, because
or sheep ranchers?
Yeah, sheep ranchers. And, that's, you think I'm interested in everything, but I'm not. I had a sheep wagon when we lived in Wyoming. Then I fell in love with the sheep wagon and the sheep ranchers, lots of Basque ranchers when we lived between Buffalo and Sheridan, Wyoming. And when I came down here, we sold our sheep wagon, and it was one of those few things that I regret ever doing, and I wanted another sheep wagon. And the more I started learning about some of the sheep industry down here, the more I realized it was another example of social injustice that had occurred in what happened to the almost exclusively Hispanic sheep ranchers, and how they lost their sheep, how they lost their ranches, and times changed, and the cattle people came in, and there were not down here as much as there was in northern Colorado and some of the things in Wyoming and Utah with the battle lines drawn between the cattle ranchers and the sheep ranchers. But times changed, and Fred Walson had a lot to do with that change. There's a lovely lady in Pueblo, Marie Pacheco, And it was her grandfather that went into a partnership with Fred Walson. And Virginia Sanchez has written pleas, petitions, and there's another word on there, and a book about the Los Cuchulenos of Huerfano County, which is the community out east. And I'd first heard the story, I believe, well, I first heard the concern that so many of the Hispanic people were asked to sign treaties, deeds, documents, agreements that were in English they didn't understand a word of, but sign here and everything will be okay. Fred Walson partnered with, and I don't know whether his surname was Pacheco, but with the Hispanic gentleman that was out east and on a deal with, I believe, 3,000 sheep. And there was a blizzard, and the sheep basically suffocated. The snow was so deep that the sheep suffocated, and they lost most, if not all, of the 3,000 sheep. And instead of doing the right thing and accepting as partners a share of the loss, instead he lost the sheep and he took the Hispanic man's ranch. So stories like that over and over have occurred. Beautiful, wonderful stories of people and herding the sheep, and really up until early 1900s, probably prior to World War II, still a pretty good sheep industry. And wool came in and out of fashion. It was necessary for the uniforms in World War II and was a very, very lucrative type thing. And then other fibers and fabrics became more popular. Lamb and mutton became less desirable as a meat product. Sylvia Lucero Brandel, that I tell you about, she had a relative that walked from east of Walsenburg, from the Cachara that's east of Walsenburg, to Washington State to bring sheep back. And he wrote, I think it's 22 stanza, is it corrido? And friend Michael Rael from Cuesta, New Mexico has finally put that to music, and it'll be performed. We're going to do a project over here at Francisco Fort on the 17th of August called Woolly Huerfano, the history of the sheep industry in Huerfano County.
Wow.
Yeah. And I've got another sheep wagon that I just got this last year, and her name's Lizzie, and she will kind of have her debut over here at the at Francisco Fort. I don't need a sheep wagon. I don't have roots as a sheep rancher. I love the culture. I love the animals. I love the fiber. And I have another sheep wagon.
So what was the sheep wagon for?
Oh, the sheep wagons are so cool. They look like a mini covered wagon and have been in use in the country here in the West that would take sheep to the high mountain countries. And the sheep wagon originally was pulled by a team of horses, and they would follow the sheep around, especially in the summertime, in the high mountain ranges. And the sheep herder would live in the wagon. It's the first camper. They are so cleverly done. The early ones are all just exactly alike, with a bunk across the back. Underneath the bunk is a table that pulls out like a breadboard, and the benches down the side for storage. Had the greatest little cast iron stoves that they could cook in, and I just think they're the neatest thing in the world, and they become real collectible. Still in use. And my sheep wagon, my new sheep wagon, was built in 1930s from a kit, and it was from Wyoming. And the interesting history of it, even though it's a sheep wagon per se, it was built by a cattle rancher. And he thought the sheep people were really smart because they followed the sheep around all summer long, and some of them lived them in the winter too. But he still calved on the open range in Wyoming in the early spring, and it was really, really cold. And rather than sleeping in a tent, they needed to stay out with the cattle. And so he decided he would build a sheep wagon from a kit to go be on the range with his cows as they were calving. So my sheep wagon was born as a cow wagon, I guess. And the funny story about it, when I found it, it was trying to find. I did the genealogy on my sheep wagon. You got to do that. And the guy that I got it from said he'd got it from. Told me who he got it from, and he knew the story originally of it being built in 1930. He said it was built by the nuns, and I thought all these little ladies in black habits working on building a sheep wagon. I couldn't imagine it, but it turns out that the rancher that built his name was J.C. Nunn, N-U-N-N. So my sheep wagon was built by the nuns. So it's been a really fun project, and the kids over at the shop here in La Vita, we were having a conversation at a 4-H thing, and they were going to take a concession wagon and remodel it and try and be a camper trailer. And I said, well, you got to come take a look at my sheep wagon. If you want to see the smartest utilization of space that's been around for, 100 and how many years, 150 years, come look at the sheep wagon, and it'll give you some ideas of what you might want to do with your little trailer. Well, they came out and they decided to take the sheep wagon as their spring project. So they took my sheep wagon down to the school and did some work on it and did some wiring on it and brought it up to date and put a new coating on it. So it became a community project, which is just warms my heart to no end. So.
And it has to be driven on a wagon.
Now it can be, it's got a hitch so you can pull it with a pickup truck.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or a vehicle.
So let's say that my family lived in Cucharas, because maybe that would have been, now that you're saying that, East Walsenburg.
Yeah, very
right
east.
Location.
Yeah, very east.
I need to go back at the records and see what specifically the location says in the baptismal records and stuff.
And you need to talk to Ron and Sylvia. It's like me and culture. I know just enough to be dangerous. I love it. I'm passionate, but boy, I don't have the taproot.
Okay. So let's say that they lived out there and they were sheep ranchers.
Right.
So they would have a house.
Right.
And the wife and the kids would stay there, and then the husband would go. They'd have their own little herd, and then they would graze them.
They may graze them, yeah. And a lot of my understanding, there were some huge sheep operations down here.
And they would go all the way up to like Wyoming, right?
Probably only to our mountains.
Oh.
I don't know that they would go that far. Sylvia's relative that went to get sheep to bring them back out here. And part of my fascination with the sheep goes back. I lived in Durango, and I've always been fascinated with Native American culture and weaving and wool yarn. And churro sheep are a whole nother story that is just fascinating. And I thought they were just the sheep of the Navajo, and they were almost extinct. I think they were down to like 27 pair that were pure. And the churro are the smartest, not the sheep are smart, but the breed is such a smart breed. And it was so perfect for the desert environment because they have softer hooves, so they aren't as harsh on the environment. They nibble the top rather than pulling the flora up from the roots. The Navajos loved them because they were small, and they had the least greasy fleece of any of the sheep. So when they sheared them, if you live in the desert, trying to wash wool to make it usable so that you can spin with it is a real challenge. So they were the least greasy fleece, and they were like, I say in so many ways, like a little buffalo, in that they could use the whole sheep. They milked them, they sheared them, they used their wool, they butchered them, they ate them. Every part of them was useful. So then the BIA in their wisdom, or the government in their wisdom, said, oh, but they're such a little sheep, and you could have bigger sheep. You could breed them with something like a Rambouillet and get a lot more wool and a lot more of this. And they actually, and this is another place where the churro are kind of sadly related to the buffalo. They did sheep jumps and pushed the sheep off cliffs. They shot sheep in front of the hogans. It was a horrible, horrible, dark story. And Dr. Lyle McNeil was a veterinarian that was at Flagstaff, and then he moved up to Logan, Utah. And he was working on trying to get the breed reintroduced and get pure bloodlines of churro sheep. And I was fortunate enough, he called me. I was living in Wyoming at the time. Funny story about I'd worked with Bruce Burnham at Burnham Trading Post, doing some things with wool and wool yarn weavings and whatnot. And Bruce had given him my name, and where I was closer to Logan, Utah than anybody else. He wanted me to come up and see the sheep and the breeding project and see if he had a wool that was soft enough that maybe it could be used as a garment weight wool. And so went up, and if I wasn't fascinated with the churros before, then I was really fascinated with them. Still, I had thought that the churros were only a breed that was on the reservation. Come to find out, which just makes my heart sing, is the people, the sheep herders, the Hispanos out in the original Cachara had churro sheep.
And is that the wool that they used for the colcha embroidery?
Yeah, and that now is the traditional wool that was used for colcha embroidery. And as I was learning about colcha and learned that churro was the wool of choice, it only made sense that the churro came right up the migratory paths with the Hispanic families. And churro, it's a lovely, lovely wool, and traditionally churro colcha embroidery, and you've got to say colcha embroidery because colcha by itself is the bed covering, so it's colcha embroidery, was done with churro yarn. Sabanilla, the fabric that the bed covering was made out of, was woven frequently out of churro yarn. And then when they started hand dyeing churro yarn, and originally with colcha embroidery, it was done kind of utilitarian in that you had these beautiful Sabanilla bed coverings, and somebody's toenail would get caught and it had a hole, and it would be like darning, and it would be a utilitarian patch. And when they started doing some of the dyeing of the fabric, or dyeing of the fiber, or dyeing of the wool, it became kind of an art form, and they ended up covering the holes with flora and fauna and designs that were more and more creative. So, but that was done with churro yarn. So churro was there in northern New Mexico, came up here, and was very much up here at one point in time.
Can you get churro yarn now?
Yeah. There's churros are kind of a big deal, and they, thanks mostly to Lyle McNeil, they've been reintroduced. They've been reintroduced down on the reservation, and I have a passion. Joe Barry, that is in Arroyo Seco, has a company called Taos Wools, and he works exclusively with churro yarn. He hand dyes. He's a photographer. He's a neat Renaissance man. Gotta love him. And he still hand dyes in big open pots, and some of the pictures that he sends of his latest dye lots and whatnot against that gorgeous Taos turquoise sky, his pictures are just incredible. And you can get it from other sources, but I like getting mine from Joe. And he does several different weights of the churro yarn. The one that I use is called Chica, and it's a tapestry weight. It's a single ply. It's just beautiful yarn, and it's just so nice to work with. I love it.
I don't think the yarn I got was churro, so I'd have to. But
Probably
I'm
not.
Just starting out, so
Yeah,
maybe I'll
okay.
wait till I'm a little better before I.
And I have a wealth of churro yarn, of Chica yarn, in probably 50 different colors, and I would be happy to share yarn with you.
Oh, thanks.
I have a project that I need to show you that I brought, that talking about Gardner and that kind of being the cradle of civilization in Huerfano County. There was a Montoya sheep ranch that was built in the late 1800s, and they ran 1,500 sheep out of that sheep ranch. And I'm doing a colcha embroidery of the sheep ranch.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, it's a tapestry kind of thing,
Wow.
and that the advent of the tapestry type of culture embroidery is a whole story in and of itself. But I'll show you.
And is it you that's doing the kind of fiber arts? Um,
Oh, I
I don't
do.
know what you're calling it, but like a periodic get together for where
Yeah,
people can do different fiber arts. Is that
I've
assuming?
done wool festivals here for a long time, and that's kind of what Huajatolla Heritage Foundation, we did fiber festivals and morphed into working with the museum and then doing this woolly Huerfano. A professor from Adams, I think Adams State's now Adams University, over in Durango, named Andrew Gilliford, has written a book, and it sounds so geeky, and you can't imagine it being one of the best books you ever read, but it is, called The Woolly West, The History of the Sheep Industry in Colorado. And it is so well written. It is so interesting. I can't imagine even people who aren't remotely interested in the sheep industry don't find it very, very readable. And one of the interesting things about it, he talks a lot about the sheep herders, and it was mostly northern Colorado and western slope Colorado, but a lot of the carvings on the aspen trees, that was kind of a art form for the sheep herders, and you could tell where they went and who they were and what year they were there, and that is a whole thing called arbor glyphs, just like
Is there a
petroglyphs.
collection of photographs of those that have been found?
In Gilliford's book, and I
Oh,
believe
cool.
they've done it other places, but interesting book. And they go from just names and dates and initials to some that naked women were one of their favorite things to
Of
carve on the
course.
trees.
Yeah.
And the thing about that is it's an art form not different than the petroglyphs that stay engraved in the rocks. The aspen trees get old and fall over and die. So he has made kind of a project of there on the western slope to get as many of the arbor glyphs recorded as he possibly can.
Cool.
And he's going to be our guest speaker, one of our
Oh,
guest
good.
speakers. Yeah.
So what's the impact of like was it just open grazing land in southern Colorado up until that had to have stopped things, right? That
Yeah.
they couldn't just graze wherever.
And that's some of the things that I learned in Guilford's book is when they went from the open range to and grazing on government land and to having permits to being fenced out to having narrow pathways to take their sheep to the higher country. I was just reading a thing yesterday that was out of Utah, and terrible things happened with them. Uh, Sheep herders needed to stay on their narrow little paths of land, and if they had to cross somebody else's land, sometimes they simply could not. Sometimes there was a window of opportunity time wise. Sometimes there was a prescribed pathway that they couldn't get off the pathway to get from one place to the other. This thing that I was reading yesterday that was out of Utah, and ranchers came in and shot up the sheep wagon, shot the sheep herders, and clubbed the sheep. I mean, just horrible
Oh
things,
gosh.
horrible things. So it's not a pretty piece of history, and it's just another one of those social justice kinds of things that most people don't even know about.
And were there, because I know it was typical, the old way of doing things was you had community grazing.
Right.
Did they ever was there any of that in Huerfano?
I don't believe so. Not like on the land grants down around San Luis and in Castilla County, where they had treaties that were violated, but gave them ancient grazing rights. We're pretty dry and desert-like, so getting them to the mountains, and the mountain out west before you go over Startup La Vida Pass, that really is the backbone Gardner backs up to, is called Sheep Mountain, because that's where a lot of them took the sheep to be grazed, was on Sheep Mountain. And I'm not as smart as I should be, or nor as I would like to be, but I know bits and pieces, and I know people, and I know that my saying my fingers up, my grandfather moved the sheep up towards Sheep Mountain. My grandfather spent the summers on the mountain. They brought the sheep up, they brought the sheep down. I hear the stories, and that's my connection.
Well, and I have to wonder if my family was already here before the mines came, maybe doing some sheep stuff.
Right.
Something clearly happened with the sheep industry for them to decide to move into presumably mining.
Yes.
Which that was horribly. Actually, you know what? I haven't confirmed that they were ever mining.
Yeah.
They eventually moved up to Pueblo, where they worked at like the mill.
Yep. That was
so that seemed like a reasonable.
That
movement.
Mines closed, and then everybody went.
Or it was just dangerous. They told me at the museum that it was less dangerous, and you made more money actually working in the mill. I mean, it was also dangerous, but a different.
And the mines closed down here. There just wasn't any mining industry left down here. So, in order to survive and feed your family, the great majority of people either commuted or moved to Pueblo to work at the CF&I. And I don't know, CF&I, Colorado Fuel and Iron, was the Walsen mines down here, whether they gave any preference to people from that had worked in the mines down here to have jobs at the mill in Pueblo. The jobs down here were so dangerous. One of the statistics, 546 miners died in like 2 years in the mines down here. And in my cookbook, which you wouldn't expect to find in a cookbook, I have a pay stub from a miner that ended up dying in the mines down here. And it was this lady's step-grandfather. And it's the pay stub that... And I don't recall the year, but he had worked for a period of time, whatever the pay period was, two weeks, maybe a whole month, and he made $36.29, and he owed the company store $37.69. At the end of the pay period, he owed the company store more than he made.
Ouch. You know, going to that museum is kind of interesting because it's a bit like they do bring up, what is that called? Not credit, but
the chits.
Yes.
Yeah.
They had a little thing on that, and it was sort of an apologist.
Yes.
Take on it. It was like, well, they could opt into it if they wanted to. They didn't have to do it, and then it was only used when they couldn't make payroll, like during the Depression, and they couldn't make payroll otherwise. They gave them that. It was.
I would not agree with that at all with the things that I've learned. And, I've learned another side of this story perhaps, but Chuck Solomon is a attorney in Denver that has deep roots down here, and he has collected pictures of the mines and has so much information and has shared with us very, very, very graciously. But he came from a big Lebanese family, and the Lebanese people came to be merchants, not miners, but merchants, and offer an option other than the company store.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. And
is that the Maloofs? Was that the Maloofs?
No, their name's Solomon.
Solomon.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there were Maloofs and Habibs. There's a lot of Lebanese down here, and the sheep ranch, the Montoya Sheep Ranch, ended up being bought by the Ferrises, who were Lebanese, and the little town where the Montoya Sheep Ranch was originally called Canyon or something, and then it was called Talpa, and they kept having to change the name because there were other post offices with the same name. And Jeanette Ferris Thatch was a little girl down there in the 20s, I believe, and they ended up naming the post office Ferrisita, and it was said it was named after the little Thatch girl, and it was called Ferrisita. And recently I've heard the story, and I like it even better, that her babysitter, nanny, caretaker was Hispanic, and she would call her the little Ferrisita. It was the little Ferrisita girl, and that's where the town of Ferrisita, and it really should be Ferrisita. So just fun stories, but that was a Lebanese family.
Yeah, my great-grandfather, when in partnership, had a store with a Maloof in Clayton, outside of Clayton, New Mexico.
Yeah.
It was called the Pacheco and Maloof store.
And I had Maloof friends in Wyoming, but I don't know that I had any Maloofs down here. But lots of different industries sprang up around the mining industry. Some places that I was sure were whorehouses because they were behind houses, and they had just all these little doors and rooms that would hold a bed, and that was about all. And come to find out, when did some research, and a gentleman down here named Gerald Durant that just has lots of pieces of the local history said, oh no, those were batches. And a lot of the people would build these additions, and there were, just room for a bed because the miners just needed a place to sleep.
Oh, didn't they, like, two guys would share it because one would work the night
Sure.
shift and one would work the day shift, so they would just,
Yeah.
gosh, that's so grim.
And then I got a great story about whorehouses down here, too.
Okay, let's hear it.
This is one of my favorite stories. Another program we did, there's a lady named Randy Samuelson Brown, and she had done a book on ladies of the night in Denver. But anyway, thought it would be fun to do a Valentine program about looking for love in all the wrong places. Just the kind of things I like to do. And Randy came down, talked about her book, but did some of the research of where the houses were in La Vida and Walsenburg. And my favorite story was the upscale house was on Main Street above the Eagles. There's a little tiny, tiny balcony. But apparently the girls would go lounge on the balcony and call men upstairs. And one of the ladies fell out of favor. She got, I don't know, got too old or too mouthy or too something, and was left the house. And she went across the street, and this is right on Main and between 6th and 7th Street, right downtown Walsenburg. So she went across the street, and the girls would be up there lounging and inviting the men up, and she'd go out and say, oh, but come over here, it's cheaper, I'll give you a better deal, I'll teach you things you've never heard before, learned before, or done before. Later in that building, and it still is labeled as that building, Frank Azar, the notorious attorney in Colorado, his mom opened a
Is that the long arm of the law? Oh, okay.
Yeah. The strong arm.
Strong arm.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Sorry, wrong arm.
Yeah. And he was from down here. And I believe Azars.
Oh, really?
I don't know what nationality they were. I don't know. But anyway, she opened an antique store, and it was called The Fallen Angel.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah.
On my way here.
And that was where the lady went across the street to
okay.
ply her trade.
All right, I'll have to go check that out
Yeah.
again.
And then 8th Street was called the Recreational District. It was fun to do the research, and everybody has some sort of story to add to the stories. So, and I love hearing the stories.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then tell me about the cookbook.
Okay, cookbook's my latest labor of love. Had the idea of doing the cookbook, and again, following the money. This last spring, a little grant came out from Colorado Creative Industries for traditional arts. And I proposed that we get this small, it was only $3,000, to do a cookbook, because cooking is the most traditional of all arts. And they bought into it and gave me the money. And I had been collecting recipes for it from the time that we had our 25 Founding Family event. That just is the next step of what I thought needed to be shared with people. So the Huerfano Heritage Cookbook came to be, and we did it in 4 sections. The first section is basically built around the 25 Founding Hispanic families. So my Hispanic and Mexican recipes are all in the first section, and some of them are the old families. I love this book.
And it's really cool. Okay, so it looks like it has...
It's a history book, picture book, storybook.
Wow.
So the second section is coal camps and cow camps. So that's my ethnic recipes and my Americana recipes. And then the third section is just friends of Huerfano, people that just, for some reason, have connections down here that don't fit in the other two categories. And then the final section is kids, because you got to do things and remember the kids. So some of them are funny kid recipes and recipe for kids.
Fun. And
have a book designer that used to live in La Vida.
Very colorful.
It's just, I am so pleased with it.
So it's about to be published in a few days, and then where will people be able to get it?
On the Facebook site for Huajatolla Heritage Foundation, and different merchants are willing to carry it, and then I'll just love peddling in any place I can, because being able to talk to the people. There's over 90 people that have contributed to it, and because it's my sheep wagon and sheep. The lady that actually tipped me off where the sheep wagon was that I got, it was over in Cortez. It's come down from Wyoming. She had some sheep wagon recipes. I love rhubarb, so there's way too many rhubarb recipes. This is a recipe Marie Nacarado Espinoza was from and she's one of the few that's not from Huerfano County, but is from Los Animas County, from Trinidad. Old Italian family that married into an old Hispanic family. Some of their recipes. Santa Claus was one of I did an honored elder program. Again, the county commissioners gave me money to do this, and we did it last year, and their budget was too tight this year, but the county administrator said probably we'll have money for it again. And what I did was every month I got nominations from the community, but every month we did an honored elder, and most months we also did an honored younger, because I feel like we need to recognize those under the age of 21 too. And our honored elders, we presented them to the county commissioners. They got a jacket that had the Huerfano County logo embroidered on it. They had a professional photograph taken, certificate and whatnot. And it was really a wonderful program, because it really got to showcase some of the people. There's people down here that are honored all the time, and our deal was to honor some of the unsung heroes. Juanita Mays is one of them that's in here. Several of and she was my honored elder in April. She had just turned 100 and was still living on her ranch in Pass Creek up by Gardner. And we got to honor her. She passed away later that year, but Carolyn Newman, who's really our local historian, but she dresses up as Mother Jones and does a Mother Jones persona. And that's just so interesting. Lady Donna Hernandez, who's an extraordinary colchera, a colcha embroiderer, and my friend down in San Luis embroidered a large picture of SPM-DTU. Do you know about SPM-DTU?
Sure.
Something else that I just love. And so I have the picture of her colcha embroidery of SPM-DTU, which, for those who don't know, I don't know the string of words in Spanish, but it was a grassroots organization and fits into the mining thing, because the mining industry and the towns that sprung up, and they show these wonderful little towns with these great little houses with picket fences and neat yards and whatnot, did not go to people of color. And even out in Cokedale, there's a beautiful, beautiful building that was the YMCA, and there is a shack on the back. There's just literally a little clapboard shack that says Black YMCA. The Hispanics were not necessarily, or the people with color were not given the same benefits as the Anglos. Excuse me. And lots of times when they would get killed in the mining accidents, there were no benefits whatsoever. And the widows and children that had nothing, if they were lucky enough to live in one of the mining houses, they would have like 48 hours to get out of the house. And so the SPM DTU was started as a grassroots social aid society. And I just think it's absolutely fascinating. I think there ended up being 67 concilios, the branches, and one of the last ones was in Huerfano County. But and there's 7 active ones in the state of Colorado. It didn't die. It started in Antonito, Colorado.
Yeah, and I think they're renovating. They got a grant to renovate that one.
Renovating
right?
the building. So we had just the kind of thing we do. One of our events, we had them come up and be the guest speakers.
Cool.
So Huajatolla Heritage Foundation just meddles in anything I'm interested in.
Yeah, you're a real agitator. I love it.
Yes.
So you were going to tell me about the name.
Okay. Huajatolla, the Hispanic spelling of it is Huajatolla. Huajatolla. The Native American spelling of it is Wahtoya. It's pronounced exactly the same way, Huajatolla. Anglos call them Spanish Peaks. They've been called breasts of the earth. Neither the Hispanic culture or the Native culture would have named a mountain after a body part. But the legend of it I love is, and it kind of cuts across both cultures, is the land where the nurturing fluids are born, which sounds like breasts, but they believe that that's where the rain starts, is at those mountains. So they're beautiful mountains. They're the closest mountains to Texas, which is one of the reasons we get a lot of Texans up here. Back up towards the East Peak is a whole enclave called Little Kansas that was started during the Dust Bowl. There's still a number of the people still have cabins, generational, 3rd, 4th generation in Little Kansas. And it was the concept of a pastor back there that the families were dying because of the dust and losing their land and their ranches, and he started this beautiful little enclave back against the mountains with water tumbling through so they could come and get renewed. And it's still called Little Kansas.
Well, I've learned so much. Thank you so much for sharing your passions. And thank you for all your work that you've done.
Love what I do.
Because it's like a similar mission to this podcast, which is to
keep the culture alive.
Document it, educate, share, and instill the pride of all these amazing.
I've been real fortunate to have money from grant money from an organization called Think 360 Art, and I think I'm on my 5th little grant for them, and it's primarily to work with elders. And we just did a painting class that was kind of cross-cultural, and I'm doing it out in Gardner, which is really interesting. Little tiny community, and I had 24 people for this painting class.
That's great.
But the next one we're going to do is quill earrings with Charlene Velarde. That's got both Native and Hispanic blood. And then I'm going to do another culture embroidery class out there, because the first one I had to turn people away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
yes, when we get done here, you're going to give me a little tutorial, because I've been trying to learn on my own.
I love talking about culture, and I love teaching it because it's so forgiving. It is so forgiving. And I'm not anal about the stitches. I just want people to learn, and you'll come to your own perfection.
Okay. Thanks for the boost of confidence.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sandy. I really appreciate it. Thanks for listening to Luminaria. You can reach me at luminariapod@gmail.com. Our intro and outro music is of Varsoviana, performed by Nieves Anaya and his daughter Ernestina Anaya at Arroyo Hondo, New Mexico in 1940. It's part of the Juan Bautista Rael collection at the Library of Congress.